The processing hall of Station Omega-7 smelled like fear and disinfectant. Commander Yuna stood near the observation window, her violet skin catching the harsh white lights above. She watched the newest batch of refugees shuffle through the decontamination chambers below. They came from dozens of worlds, dozens of species, all running from the same thing: war, famine, or the slow death of dying planets. Yuna did not want to be here. She was a warship commander, third daughter of the noble house Sora, trained since childhood to lead fleets into battle. But the Valorian Empire had other plans for her today. The patronage program. Every noble house was required to claim one member of a lesser species and take responsibility for them. The Empire called it a gesture of unity and compassion. Yuna called it what it really was: political theater designed to make the powerful look kind. Her adjutant, a nervous young officer named Minho, stood beside her with a data tablet. He scrolled through the available candidates with practiced efficiency. "We have several promising options, Commander," he said. "A Kellian engineer with useful technical skills, a Morthian translator who speaks 47 languages, a—" "I don't care about useful," Yuna interrupted. "I care about quiet. Find me someone who won't cause problems on my ship." Minho nodded and continued scrolling. Yuna turned her attention back to the processing floor. Most of the refugees moved in groups, clinging to others of their kind for comfort. The insectoid cricks huddled together, their antennae twitching with anxiety. The amphibian Delori held hands in long chains, their webbed fingers interlocked. Everyone was afraid. Everyone was desperate. Everyone except one. Yuna's eyes found him near the back of the crowd, a human male standing alone. He wasn't huddling. He wasn't trembling. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart, watching everything around him with calm, steady eyes. Humans were rare in this sector. Their homeworld was far away, and their colonies had suffered badly in the recent expansion wars. Most humans Yuna had encountered were broken things, traumatized, defeated, hollow. This one was different. "That one," she said, pointing. "The human." Minho looked up from his tablet with surprise. "The human, Commander? Are you certain?" "Why wouldn't I be? Humans are considered difficult. They have a reputation for being unpredictable, emotionally unstable. Several noble houses have reported incidents with their human wards." Yuna studied the man below. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the chaos around him. A crick stumbled into him accidentally, and he simply stepped aside, helping the creature regain its balance before returning to his original position. "He looks stable enough to me," Yuna said. "What's his file say?" Minho pulled up the information. Name: Taiho. Age: 29 solar cycles. Origin: Earth 3 colony, destroyed during the Reth Dominion expansion. Former occupation: military, specifically something called a Marine. Marine? It appears to be a type of soldier, Commander. Earth 3 was a military outpost before its destruction. The survivors were few. Yuna nodded slowly. A soldier. That explained the posture, the calm, the watchful eyes. She had known soldiers all her life. They were predictable. They followed orders. They caused fewer problems than engineers who thought they knew better or translators who talked too much. "Claim him," she said. "Process the paperwork. I want to be off this station within the hour." Minho hesitated. "Commander, I must advise caution. The reports about humans are probably exaggerated by noble houses who don't know how to handle anyone different from themselves." Yuna turned away from the window. "He's quiet. He's trained. He won't cause problems. That's all I need." She walked toward the exit, already thinking about the patrol routes waiting for her ship. The patronage program was a box to check, nothing more. She would give the human food, shelter, and safety. In return, he would stay out of her way and prove to the Empire that House Sora fulfilled its obligations. Simple, clean, forgettable. Down on the processing floor, Tejo watched the Valorian commander disappear from the observation window. He had noticed her the moment she arrived, noticed the way she carried herself, the authority in her stance, the boredom in her eyes. He had seen officers like her before, back on Earth 3, leaders who commanded respect without demanding it. A processing drone approached him with instructions. He was to follow the blue line to Docking Bay 7, where his new patron would receive him. Tai-Ho followed without complaint. The journey through Station Omega 7 took 15 minutes. He used the time to memorize the layout, exits, choke points, security stations, ventilation systems. Old habits never died, especially habits that had kept him alive when everything else had died around him. Earth 3 was gone. His unit was gone. His family was gone. For 3 years, Tai-Ho had drifted through refugee camps and processing stations, waiting for something he couldn't name. Purpose, maybe, or just a reason to keep breathing. When he reached Docking Bay 7, the Valorian commander was waiting with her adjutant. Up close, she was tall, most Valorians were, with sharp features and eyes the color of deep space. She looked at him the way someone might look at new furniture, briefly without much interest. Tai-Ho, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Commander. I am Commander Yuna of House Sora. You are now under my patronage. You will live aboard my ship, the Crimson Dawn. You will be given quarters, food, and protection. In return, you will follow ship rules and stay out of trouble. She paused. Do you understand? Yes, Commander. Do you have any skills that might be useful aboard a warship? Tai-Ho considered the question. He could kill someone 17 different ways with his bare hands. He could strip and reassemble any weapon made in the last century. He could survive on minimal food and water for weeks. He could read a battlefield in seconds and predict enemy movements with frightening accuracy. I can clean, he said, and organize supplies. Yuna nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. Minho will show you to your quarters. We depart in 30 minutes. She walked away without another word. Tai-Ho watched her go, filing away details. The slight limp in her left leg, old injury probably. The way her hand rested near her sidearm. Combat veteran, definitely. The tension in her shoulders. Stressed, overworked, probably underfunded. Minho led him through the ship's corridors to a small room near the cargo bay. It had a bed, a storage locker, and a tiny window showing the stars outside. This will be your space, Minho said. Meal times are posted in the common area. Don't wander into restricted sections. Don't cause problems. He hesitated at the door. The commander is fair, but she has no patience for troublemakers. Keep your head down, and you'll be fine. Tai-Ho nodded. Understood. When Minho left, Tai-Ho sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was thin, but it was better than the floor of a refugee camp. The room was small, but it was private. The situation was uncertain, but uncertainty was familiar. He had learned long ago that life rarely made sense. You survived, or you didn't. You adapted, or you died. Commander Yuna had claimed him out of obligation. She saw him as a checkbox, a political requirement, a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. That was fine. Tai-Ho had been underestimated before. He closed his eyes and slept, or at least, he appeared to sleep. In truth, part of his mind stayed awake, listening to the ship's sounds, cataloging footsteps in the corridor, tracking the rhythm of the Crimson Dawn coming to life around him. Humans, after all, never truly slept. They only pretended to. 3 months passed aboard the Crimson Dawn, and Tai-Ho became invisible. He cleaned the corridors with mechanical precision. He organized the supply rooms until everything had a place and everything was in its place. He ate his meals alone in the corner of the common area, spoke only when spoken to, and never once caused trouble. The crew noticed him the way they might notice a cleaning drone. Useful, quiet, easily forgotten. Some of them whispered that the commander's human was broken, damaged by whatever had happened on Earth 3. Others joked that he was more machine than man. Tai-Ho heard every whisper. He simply didn't react. Commander Yuna barely acknowledged his existence. She passed him in corridors without a glance. She never asked about his past, his skills, or his thoughts. To her, he was furniture, a political obligation with a heartbeat. This suited Tai-Ho perfectly. He used the time to learn. He memorized the ship's layout completely. Every maintenance tunnel, every emergency exit, every blind spot in the security system. He learned the names and habits of every crew member. He learned when the guards changed shifts, when the commander slept, and when the ship was most vulnerable. He wasn't planning anything. It was simply what he did. Preparation was survival. Knowledge was armor. At night, while the ship slept, Tai-ho exercised in his tiny quarters. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches, the same routine he had followed since he was 16 years old, since the day the Marines had taken a scared boy and turned him into something else entirely. On the 93rd day of his patronage, everything changed. It happened during the night cycle, when the ship's lights dimmed and most of the crew retreated to their bunks. Tai-ho was in his quarters, lying on his bed with his eyes closed, breathing slowly and steadily. He wasn't sleeping, he was listening. Footsteps in the corridor, 3 sets, moving with careful precision, stopping outside a door 4 sections away. The commander's quarters. Tai-ho's eyes opened. The footsteps didn't belong to crew members. The rhythm was wrong, too controlled, too deliberate. These were people trained to move quietly, and they were heading toward the one person on this ship who mattered. Tai-ho was out of his bed and through his door in 2 seconds. He moved through the ship's corridors like a ghost, avoiding the main passages, using the maintenance tunnels he had memorized weeks ago. His bare feet made no sound on the metal floors. His breathing stayed calm and even. When he reached the section outside the commander's quarters, he saw them. 3 figures in dark armor, faces hidden behind masks. One of them was working on the door's security panel. The other 2 stood guard, holding weapons Tai-ho recognized immediately. Neural disruptors, designed to paralyze without killing. They wanted the commander alive. For now, Tai-ho had no weapons. He had no armor. He was wearing sleep clothes and nothing else. It didn't matter. He stepped out of the shadows. "Hey," he said. The 2 guards spun toward him, but Tai-ho was already moving. He closed the distance before they could aim, grabbing the first guard's weapon arm and twisting hard. The joint snapped with a wet crack. The guard screamed. Tai-ho took the disruptor from the falling hand and used it on the second guard before she could fire. She collapsed, paralyzed by her own weapon. The third assassin abandoned the door panel and charged, drawing a blade. Tai-ho sidestepped the first slash, caught the attacker's wrist, and drove his elbow into the exposed throat. The assassin dropped, choking. 11 seconds. 3 enemies neutralized. Tai-ho stood over them, breathing steadily, listening for reinforcements. There were none. This was a small team, probably hired for stealth rather than strength. Behind him, the commander's door slid open. Yuna stood there in her sleeping clothes, a sidearm in her hand, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. She saw Tai-ho. She saw the bodies at his feet. She saw the blood on his hands. "What?" she started. "Assassins," Tai-ho said. 3 of them. They were trying to breach your door." Yuna stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked at the guards groaning on the floor, at the unconscious assassin with the broken arm, at the one still choking from the throat strike. "You stopped them," she said slowly, as if the words didn't make sense. "Yes. Alone. Yes. Unarmed. I improvised." Yuna lowered her sidearm slowly. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, Tai-ho realized, but from the after effects of adrenaline. She had been ready to fight. She just hadn't expected the fight to already be over. "How did you know?" she asked. "I heard them. Wrong footsteps. Wrong rhythm. They didn't belong on this ship." "You heard them from your quarters? That's 4 sections away." Tai-ho shrugged. "Humans have good hearing." Yuna looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since the day she had claimed him. Her eyes moved over his face, his posture, his calm expression. She was seeing something new, something she had missed completely for 3 months. "What are you?" she whispered. Tai-ho considered the question. He had been asked this before, on Earth 3, by enemies who couldn't understand why he wouldn't stay down, why he kept getting up, why he fought with such terrible efficiency. "I'm a Marine," he said simply. "This is what Marines do." Yuna called her security chief. The assassins were taken to the brig for questioning. Tai-ho gave his statement, short, direct, without unnecessary details, and then returned to his quarters as if nothing had happened. But things had happened. Things had changed. The next morning, Yuna summoned him to her office. She sat behind her desk, looking at a data tablet with the security footage from the previous night. Tai-ho watched her watch him, watched her see the 11 seconds of violence that had saved her life. "The interrogation revealed who sent them," Yuna said finally. House Kang, a rival faction that wants to weaken my family before the Imperial Conclave. Taiho nodded. He understood politics. Politics had started the war that destroyed his home. They wanted me alive, Yuna continued, probably for ransom, or leverage, or a public execution to embarrass House Sora. She set the tablet down. You stop that. I did my duty. Your duty? Yuna's voice sharpened. You're a ward, Taiho, a refugee under my protection. Your duty is to stay safe and stay quiet. Fighting assassins in the middle of the night is not your duty. Taiho met her eyes. You took me in. You gave me food and shelter and safety. Where I come from, that creates a debt. Debts must be repaid. Yuna stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. The crew is talking about you, she said. They're calling you the Shadow Warrior, the Silent Blade, other ridiculous things. She paused. They're also afraid of you. Should they be? I don't know, should they? Taiho considered this carefully. He thought about Earth 3, about the battles he had fought, about the things he had done to survive when survival seemed impossible. I'm not dangerous to people who don't threaten what I protect, he said finally. The crew has nothing to fear from me. And House Kang? Taiho's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. House Kang should be very, very careful. Yuna leaned back in her chair. She studied him like a commander studying a new weapon, one she hadn't realized she possessed. I think, she said slowly, that I have badly underestimated you, Taiho. Most people do, he replied. It's usually a mistake. Yuna almost smiled. Almost. You're dismissed, she said. Get some rest, and next time assassins come for me. She paused, searching for the right words. Try to leave at least one of them conscious. The interrogation is easier that way. Yes, Commander. Taiho turned to leave. At the door, Yuna's voice stopped him. Taiho. He turned back. Thank you, she said. The words seemed unfamiliar in her mouth, as if she didn't say them often. You saved my life tonight. That's not something I'll forget. Taiho nodded once, then walked out. In the corridor, he allowed himself a small breath. Something had changed between them. A wall had cracked. A door had opened. He didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in 3 years, Taiho felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. After the assassination attempt, Yuna couldn't stop thinking about her human. She told herself it was practical curiosity. She was a commander. It was her job to understand the assets under her command. But the truth ran deeper than that. Taiho had shattered every assumption she had made about him, and the broken pieces didn't fit together in any way that made sense. She began watching him. Not obviously, she was too proud for that, but carefully in small glances and stolen moments. She watched him in the common area, eating alone, always positioned with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. She watched him in the corridors, moving with a fluid economy that made everyone else look clumsy by comparison. She watched him enter rooms and realized he mapped the space within seconds. Exits, cover positions, potential weapons. She saw how other species instinctively gave him extra space without understanding why, as if something in their ancient instincts recognized a predator among them. 2 weeks after the attack, she invited him to the observation deck. It was late in the night cycle, and the deck was empty except for the two of them. What were you? She asked without preamble. Before Earth 3 fell? Taiho stood beside her, watching the stars slide past the viewport. His reflection in the glass was calm, unreadable. We called ourselves Marines, he said. We were soldiers, but not regular soldiers. We were the ones they sent when everything else had failed. Failed how? When diplomacy couldn't stop a war, when treaties couldn't prevent a massacre, when the politicians ran out of words and the generals ran out of options. Taiho paused. When hope had already died, they sent us to buy time with blood. Yuna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And what did Marines do? Taiho turned to look at her. His eyes were dark and deep, like windows into something vast and terrible. We made sure the enemy never forgot the cost of making us their enemy, he said. We taught them that some victories aren't worth the price. That night, after Taiho returned to his quarters, Yuna accessed the Imperial archives. She used her security clearance to unlock files that most commanders never saw, classified reports on humanity and their military history. She read until her eyes burned. The reports were fragmentary, pieced together from observations and captured data. They painted a picture that Una found difficult to believe, even with evidence in front of her. Humans didn't fight like other species. When Valorians were wounded, they retreated to heal. When Kellians were outnumbered, they surrendered to survive. When Delori faced certain death, they accepted it with quiet resignation. Humans did none of these things. The reports described human soldiers who kept fighting with broken bones and missing limbs. They described last stands where 10 humans held positions against hundreds of enemies for hours, days, refusing to die until they simply couldn't stand anymore. They described a biological stubbornness that bordered on the supernatural, a refusal to accept defeat that made no logical sense. One report caught Yuna's attention. It described a battle on a human colony world called Samar. A single company of human marines, just 200 soldiers, had faced an invasion force of 15,000. The expected outcome was obvious: surrender or annihilation within hours. The Marines held for 11 days. When reinforcements finally arrived, only 17 Marines were still alive. But the invasion force had lost over 4,000 soldiers. The survivors refused to speak about what had happened. Some of them never recovered mentally. Una sat back in her chair, her hands trembling. She had dismissed humans as primitive. The entire galaxy had dismissed them as primitive. A young species with fragile bodies and short lifespans, barely worth noticing. What a catastrophic mistake that had been. The next morning, she summoned Taiho to her office again. "I've been reading about your species," she said, "about your military history." Taiho's expression didn't change. "What did you find?" "Reports, battle records, stories that seem impossible." Una leaned forward. "Is it true? The things humans have done in combat, the refusal to surrender, the impossible last stands, the stubbornness? That's a gentle word for it." Taiho was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "On Earth, our original homeworld, there was a phrase," he said, "never give up, never surrender." It wasn't just a saying for us. It was something built into our blood, our bones, our very nature. Why? Because our ancestors evolved in a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Predators, disease, starvation, extreme weather. Everything on Earth was dangerous. The humans who gave up died. The humans who kept fighting, kept adapting, kept refusing to accept defeat, they survived. They passed those traits to their children. Taiho met her eyes. Evolution didn't make us strong, Commander. It made us stubborn. It made us the species that would rather die fighting than live surrendering. Una absorbed this. She thought about the assassins, about the 11 seconds of violence that had neutralized 3 trained killers. She thought about the calm in Taiho's eyes, the complete absence of fear. "You weren't afraid," she said slowly, "when you fought them. I watched the footage a dozen times. You weren't afraid at all." "Fear is useful," Taiho said. "It keeps you alert, keeps you sharp. But fear cannot be allowed to control you. A Marine learns to use fear as fuel, not as a cage." "Can that be taught?" Taiho tilted his head slightly. "Why do you ask?" Una hesitated. She was about to cross a line, to transform their relationship from patron and ward into something else entirely. But she couldn't unsee what she had seen. She couldn't unlearn what she had learned. "Because I want you to teach me," she said. "I want to understand how humans fight, how they survive, how they turn impossible situations into victories." Something shifted in Taiho's expression. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. "That's a dangerous thing to ask," he said. "Understanding how humans fight means understanding how we think. How we see the world, it changes people. I'm a Valorian commander. I lead soldiers into battle. I need every advantage I can get. Even if the advantage is strange, even if it comes from a species you considered primitive yesterday." Una stood and walked around her desk, stopping directly in front of him. She was taller than him. Most Valorians were taller than most humans. But somehow, standing close, she didn't feel like the larger one. "I claimed you out of obligation," she said quietly. I saw you as a checkbox, a political requirement. I was blind. And now? Now I'm beginning to see. She held out her hand. Teach me, Taiho. Show me what humans really are. Taiho looked at her hand for a long moment, then he took it. This will not be easy, he warned. Human training methods are not gentle. I don't need gentle. I need effective. Taiho nodded slowly. His grip on her hand was firm but not crushing. Controlled strength, power held in perfect check. Then we begin tomorrow, he said. Early morning, before the crew wakes up. He released her hand. Where's something you can move in? And Commander? Yes? Eat a light dinner tonight. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or anticipation. You're going to need an empty stomach. He left her office and Yuna stood alone, her heart beating faster than it should. She had just invited a human to teach her the arts of war. The galaxy would think she had lost her mind. But Yuna had seen what Taiho could do. She had read what humans were capable of. The galaxy had underestimated them. She would not make that mistake again. The border war with the Dominion of Reth had been brewing for years. Everyone knew it was coming. Diplomats argued while generals prepared, and ordinary citizens watched the news with growing dread. When the war finally arrived, it came faster than anyone expected. The Crimson Dawn was patrolling Sector 7 when the order came. All available ships were to reinforce the border immediately. The Reth Dominion had launched a surprise offensive, and 3 Valorian outposts had already fallen. Yuna pushed her ship to maximum speed, but they were still 2 days from the combat zone when disaster found them first. 3 Dominion warships dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path. They were heavy cruisers, each one twice the size of the Crimson Dawn, armed with weapons designed to crack planets. Against 3 of them, a single destroyer had no chance. Battle stations, Yuna shouted, even as her stomach turned cold. She knew the math. Everyone on the bridge knew the math. Lieutenant Jisoo, her tactical officer, worked frantically at his console. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Commander, we cannot win this engagement, he reported. Their combined firepower exceeds ours by a factor of 8. Surrender protocols suggest... No! Yuna's voice cut through the panic like a blade. The Reth don't take prisoners. They'll execute the crew as a message to the Empire. Silence fell over the bridge. Every officer understood what their commander was saying. They were going to die here, in this empty stretch of space far from home and help. In that silence, a voice spoke from the back of the bridge. Commander, give me a shuttle and 12 volunteers. Everyone turned. Taiho stood near the communication station, still dressed in his simple civilian clothes, his face as calm as if he were discussing the weather. What are you suggesting? Yuna demanded. Boarding action. Taiho walked forward, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the 3 enemy ships. My people invented something called close quarters combat in enemy vessels. We would fly into their ships, breach their hulls, and neutralize the crew from inside. Jisoo shook his head. That's impossible. The shielding alone... Shields protect against energy weapons, Taiho interrupted. Not physical objects moving at low speed. A shuttle can slip through during a shield cycle, latch onto the hull, and cut through. Even if you got inside, Yuna said slowly, you'd be facing hundreds of enemy soldiers, on their own ship, in their own territory. Yes, that's suicide. Taiho's expression didn't change. Probably. But if I can reach their flagship's engine room, I can cripple their main power core. Without the flagship coordinating, the other 2 ships will lose tactical cohesion. They'll make mistakes. You might survive. Yuna stared at him. She had spent 3 months training with this man, learning human combat techniques, studying human history. She understood now what she was looking at. A Marine preparing for a mission, accepting death as a probable outcome, and proceeding anyway. You would die for us, she said quietly, for a crew that barely knows your name. You gave me purpose, Taiho replied. You gave me something worth protecting. My life for your ship is a trade I'm willing to make. Yuna felt something break inside her, some wall she had built around her heart, some distance she had maintained between them. She wanted to forbid it. She wanted to order him to stand down, to find another way, any other way, but she was a commander. And commanders sometimes had to send people to die. 12 volunteers, she said, her voice barely steady. Choose carefully. Tai-ho nodded. He turned to the bridge crew and spoke clearly. I need 11 people willing to follow me into that ship. The mission is dangerous. The chance of survival is low. But if we succeed, we save everyone on this destroyer. He paused. Who's with me? Silence. Then Jisoo stepped forward. I'll go. You're the tactical officer, Yuna protested. I need you here. With respect, Commander, if this mission fails, there won't be a here for me to be needed. Jisoo moved to stand beside Tai-ho. I've watched the training sessions. I know what humans can do. I want to see it for myself. Others followed, engine technicians, security officers, a medical specialist. Some Yuna knew well, others she barely recognized. All of them wore the same expression, fear mixed with determination, terror held in check by courage. 12 people, 12 souls betting their lives on a human's impossible plan. Tai-ho led them to the shuttle bay. Yuna followed, watching as they suited up in armored EVA gear, modified with cutting torches and manual weapons. Energy weapons would be useless inside an enemy ship. Too much risk of hitting critical systems. Tai-ho, he turned at the sound of her voice. Yuna walked up to him, stopping close enough that only he could hear her words. Come back, she said. That's an order. I'll try, Commander. Don't try. Do. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight. You taught me that fear is fuel. You taught me that defeat is a choice. Now prove it. Prove that humans don't know how to die. Tai-ho looked at her for a long moment. Something passed between them. Something unspoken. Something too large for words. I made you a promise once, he said quietly, that no one under my protection would die before me. I intend to keep that promise. He turned and boarded the shuttle. The hatch closed. Yuna watched as the small vessel launched into the darkness, moving toward 3 warships that could have destroyed it with a single shot. But the Wrath weren't firing at the shuttle. They were focused on the Crimson Dawn, on the real threat, on the ship trying desperately to evade their weapons. The shuttle slipped through the chaos unnoticed, a tiny needle in a hurricane of destruction. On the bridge, Yuna ordered evasive maneuvers that pushed her ship's engines to their breaking point. The Crimson Dawn danced between energy blasts, taking hit after hit, shields failing, hull breaching in a dozen places. But they survived. Minute after minute, they survived. Then the flagship's engines exploded. One moment, the massive Wrath cruiser was the center of the enemy formation, coordinating attacks, directing firepower. The next moment, its rear section erupted in a cascade of fire and debris, sending the crippled vessel spinning wildly. The other 2 ships fell into immediate confusion. Their coordinated attack became disorganized chaos. Shots went wide. Formation broke. Now, Yuna shouted, all weapons, concentrate fire on the second cruiser. The Crimson Dawn, battered and bleeding, turned to face her enemies. The crew fought with desperate fury, with human fury, Yuna realized, the same unstoppable determination that Tai-ho had taught her over months of training. When it was over, 2 Wrath cruisers were destroyed. The third, damaged beyond repair, limped away into hyperspace. And somewhere in the debris field, a tiny EVA suit was floating, tumbling slowly through the wreckage of the flagship. Found him, someone shouted. Life signs detected. Barely. The rescue shuttle brought Tai-ho back to the ship. His suit was ruptured in 11 places. His body was burned, broken, barely alive. Medical reports later revealed that his heart had stopped twice during the mission. Both times it started again on its own. Yuna sat beside his bed in the medical bay for 3 days, watching the machines breathe for him, waiting for him to wake up. When his eyes finally opened, the first thing he saw was her face. The crew, he whispered. His voice was raw, broken. Alive, Yuna said. All of them. Because of you. Tai-ho closed his eyes. Something that might have been relief crossed his battered face. I promised, he said. You did. Yuna took his hand. Gently, so gently, afraid of breaking what was already so broken. And you kept it. She didn't let go for a very long time. The footage was recovered 3 weeks after the battle. Imperial intelligence agents picked through the wreckage of the Wrath flagship, searching for tactical data and communication records. What they found instead was something far more valuable: internal security recordings that had survived the explosion in a hardened data core. The recordings showed everything. They showed the shuttle breaching the flagship's hull in a section between two shield generators, a gap so small that most species wouldn't have noticed it, let alone exploited it. They showed 12 figures in EVA suits cutting through the outer plating with plasma torches, breaching into a maintenance corridor filled with steam and sparking wires. They showed what happened next. The Wrath had been unprepared for boarding action. Their species had evolved in the cold vacuum of space stations. They fought with energy weapons at range, with drones and automated systems. The idea of enemies physically entering their ship, of fighting hand-to-hand in their own corridors, was almost incomprehensible. Tai-Ho made it comprehensible. The footage showed him moving through the ship like a force of nature. He fought with knives when guns weren't possible, with fists when knives weren't available, with anything he could grab when his hands were occupied. He took wounds that would have killed a Valorian, plasma burns across his torso, a blade through his shoulder, shrapnel embedded in his leg, and kept fighting. His team followed his example. The 11 Valorians fought with a ferocity none of them had known they possessed, driven by their human leader's impossible example. When one fell, the others closed ranks. When ammunition ran low, they improvised. When hope seemed lost, they pushed harder. The final recording was from the flagship's engineering section. It showed Tai-Ho standing alone on the bridge of the engine room, surrounded by Wrath corpses. His suit was torn, his blood floating in the zero-gravity environment. His breathing labored through cracked ribs. The rest of his team was scattered throughout the ship, some still fighting, some too wounded to continue, all of them having fought to buy him time to reach this moment. The footage showed him working the controls with bloody fingers, bypassing safety protocols, initiating an overload sequence that the Wrath had thought impossible to trigger manually. It showed him transmitting 2 words to the Crimson Dawn before the explosion: engines down, then static. The recording spread through the Imperial military like fire. Within days, every officer in the fleet had seen them. Within weeks, they had reached the civilian networks. Within months, the entire Valorian Empire knew the name Tai-Ho. They called him the Unkillable, the human who refused death, the soldier who walked into hell and walked out alive. Some called him something else, a god of war wearing mortal skin. Tai-Ho didn't care about the titles. He spent 6 weeks in the medical bay, floating between consciousness and darkness, while his shattered body slowly rebuilt itself. The Valorian doctors were amazed by his recovery. Human biology, they discovered, had remarkable regenerative capabilities when properly supported. "You should be dead," the chief medical officer told him bluntly. "By any reasonable standard, you should have died on that ship." Your heart stopped. Twice. It started again, Tai-Ho replied. That's not possible. Tai-Ho shrugged with his one working shoulder. Humans are stubborn about dying. We don't do it until we're ready. The doctor stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head and walked away, muttering about impossible species and medical miracles. Yuna visited every day. At first, her visits were brief, a commander checking on a wounded crew member, nothing more. But as the days passed, her visits grew longer. She brought reports from the ship, updates on the war, news from across the Empire. She also brought questions. "Why did you do it?" she asked one evening, sitting beside his bed as the ship's artificial sunset painted the medical bay in orange and gold. "You could have stayed safe. You could have let us die and found another patron, another ship. Why risk everything for people you barely knew?" Tai-Ho was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling. "On Earth 3, he finally said, there was a tradition. When a Marine made a promise, he kept it or died trying. There was no middle ground, no acceptable failure. The promise was everything." "What promise did you make?" "That no one under my protection would die before me." He turned his head to look at her. "You claimed me, Commander. You gave me shelter when I had nothing. That made you mine to protect." Yuna felt her throat tighten. "I claimed you out of obligation. I didn't even notice you for 3 months. That doesn't matter. The claim was still real. The responsibility was still real." Tai-Ho's eyes held hers. "And somewhere along the way, the obligation became something else." "What?" "Choice. I stopped protecting you because I had to. I started protecting you because I wanted to. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to address directly. Yuna looked away first, blinking rapidly. The Empire is changing, she said, switching to safer territory. The recordings from the battle, they've changed how people see humans. You're not furniture anymore. You're not pets or charity cases. She paused. Some people are afraid of you now, others are inspired. A few are both. And you? Yuna considered the question carefully. I remember the first day I saw you, she said, standing in that processing hall, alone, calm, watching everything with those dark eyes. I thought you were broken. I thought you were empty. I was empty, in a way. You're not empty now. No. Taiho's voice was soft. Now I have something to fill me up. Yuna stood, smoothing her uniform with nervous hands. I should let you rest. The doctors say you'll be cleared for light duty in 2 weeks. Commander. She stopped at the door. Yuna, Taiho said. It was the first time he had used her name without her title. She turned back. Thank you, he said, for seeing me, for letting me fight, for waiting. Yuna nodded once, not trusting her voice, and left. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall and pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart was beating faster than it should, and there was a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. The galaxy was changing. The war was reshaping everything. Alliances, borders, the very definition of power. And somewhere in the midst of all that chaos, a wounded human and a Valorian commander were discovering something neither of them had expected. Taiho had walked into hell for her crew. Yuna was beginning to realize she might follow him anywhere. The Imperial Conclave was held once every 5 years, gathering the noble houses of the Valorian Empire to discuss politics, forge alliances, and settle disputes. It was a place where wars could be prevented with words or started with a single insult. This year, House Sora attended with something they had never possessed before. Fear. Not their fear, the fear of others. When Yuna's shuttle landed at the Grand Palace, she immediately noticed the change. Delegates from other houses who had once ignored her now watched from a distance. Servants whispered as she passed. Security officers tensed when her party entered rooms, all because of the human walking beside her. Taiho had fully recovered from his wounds, though new scars marked his body, souvenirs from a battle that had become legend. He wore simple civilian clothes as befitting his official status as a ward, but no one looked at him and saw a ward anymore. They saw the unkillable, the god of war. They're staring, Yuna murmured as they walked through the palace halls. Let them, Taiho replied quietly. Fear is useful. It makes enemies hesitate. We're not at war here. This is politics. Politics is war with prettier words. The principles are the same. Yuna smiled despite herself. 3 months of training with this man had changed how she thought about everything. She saw threats and opportunities everywhere now, calculated angles and escape routes without conscious thought. She moved differently, spoke differently, and faced challenges with a confidence she had never possessed before. Her human had transformed her, and everyone could see it. The conclave's opening ceremony was held in the Grand Atrium, a vast chamber where representatives of all major houses gathered beneath a ceiling painted with stars. Yuna took her place among the delegates, with Taiho standing slightly behind her, close enough to reach, far enough to observe everything. She spotted Lord Doyen of House Kang almost immediately. He was a tall Valorian with sharp features and cold eyes, dressed in robes that cost more than most ships. He was the head of the house that had sent assassins to kill her 6 months ago. They had never proven the connection officially. The assassins had died before revealing their employer, a convenient accident during interrogation. But Yuna knew. Everyone knew. Doyen caught her looking and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Commander Yuna, he said, approaching, with 2 bodyguards flanking him. How wonderful to see House Sora represented at the conclave. I heard about your victory against the Wrath. Most impressive. Thank you, Lord Doyen. We were fortunate to have skilled crew members. Doyen's eyes slid to Taiho. Ah yes, the famous human. The unkillable, they call him. His smile widened. Tell me, does your pet perform tricks on command? Or does he only fight when you're in danger? The insult was deliberate and public. Several nearby delegates stopped their conversations to watch. Yuna felt anger rise in her chest, but before she could respond, Taiho spoke. "I fight when my commander orders me to fight," he said calmly. "I stop when my commander orders me to stop. The question you should be asking, Lord Doyen, is not whether I perform tricks." His dark eyes met the Valorians. "The question is whether you want to find out what happens when she removes the leash." Silence spread through the nearby crowd. Doyen's smile flickered, then returned harder than before. "Bold words for a refugee," he said. "But words are easy. Action is harder." He raised his voice so that more delegates could hear. "I hereby invoke the right of challenge. Trial by champion. House Kang against House Sora." Yuna's blood ran cold. The right of challenge was ancient law, a formal duel between house champions to settle disputes. It was rarely invoked because the stakes were so high. The losing house forfeited their voting rights at the conclave for 100 years. "On what grounds?" she demanded. "On grounds of insult," Doyen replied smoothly. "Your pet threatened a noble lord in public. Either you discipline him appropriately, or you accept the challenge and prove how Sora has the strength to back up such threats." It was a trap. Yuna could see it clearly. If she disciplined Taiho, she looked weak, a commander who couldn't control her own ward. If she refused the challenge, she looked cowardly, a house that made threats but couldn't follow through. And if she accepted, House Kang's champion was famous. A Gorath warrior named Volok, 8 feet of muscle and bone plating, genetically engineered for combat. No Valorian had ever defeated a Gorath in single combat. "You cannot refuse," Doyen said, his smile triumphant, "unless you admit your human is merely a pet after all." Before Yuna could respond, Taiho stepped forward. "I accept." Everyone stared at him, even Yuna. "You cannot accept," Doyen said, surprised. "You're not a house champion. You're a ward, "I am the defender of House Sora," Taiho interrupted. "I claimed that title when I killed 3 assassins outside Commander Yuna's quarters. I proved it when I destroyed a Reth flagship with 12 soldiers. I invoke the ancient right of any protector to stand for their house in combat." He paused. "Unless Valorian law no longer applies to humans?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Legal scholars exchanged glances, consulting quickly with each other. The ancient laws were complex, but Taiho was technically correct. Any sworn defender of a noble house could stand as champion. Doyen's face darkened. This wasn't what he had planned. He had expected Yuna to field a Valorian warrior, someone his Gorath could crush easily. A human was different. A human was unpredictable. But he couldn't back down now, not in front of the entire conclave. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth. "The duel will be held tomorrow at noon, champion against champion, to the death or surrender." He turned and walked away, his bodyguards hurrying to follow. Yuna grabbed Taiho's arm and pulled him aside, her grip tight enough to leave bruises. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "The Gorath is 8 feet tall. He's killed warriors twice your size." "I know. You could die." "I could." Taiho's expression was calm, almost peaceful. "But if I don't fight, House Sora loses everything. Your family's power, your crew's future, your own career, all of it destroyed because Doyen wanted to humiliate you." "I don't care about any of that if you're dead." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. Taiho's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise she had ever seen on his face. "Yuna," he said softly, "don't." She released his arm and stepped back, composing herself with visible effort. "Don't make this about whatever this is. You're going to fight a monster tomorrow and I need you focused." "I am focused." Taiho took her hands in his. "I'm focused on the one thing that matters. Protecting you. Protecting House Sora. Keeping my promise. And if you die keeping that promise, then I die as a Marine should, facing the enemy, refusing to surrender, making them pay for every inch of ground." Yuna's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You taught me that humans don't know how to die." "We don't," Taiho smiled, a real smile, warm and human. "We just know how to make dying really expensive for the other guy." He released her hands and walked toward his quarters, leaving Yuna alone in the corridor. She stood there for a long time, watching him go, knowing that tomorrow could change everything. The god of war was about to face his greatest test, and she could only watch and pray to whatever gods listened to Valorians. The arena was ancient, carved from the bones of the Grand Palace itself. Tiered seats rose in circles around a sand-covered floor, and every seat was filled. Delegates from 100 worlds had come to watch the duel, some hoping for blood, others for spectacle, all of them aware that history was about to be made. In one corner stood Volok, the Gorath champion of House Kang. He was everything the reports had described. 8 feet of muscle and bone plating, with arms like tree trunks and fists that could shatter stone. His species had been engineered for war centuries ago, bred for strength and speed and utter ruthlessness. In 1,000 recorded duels, no Gorath had ever been defeated by a humanoid species. In the other corner stood Taiho. He looked small by comparison, just a human in simple fighting clothes, no armor, no visible weapons except his hands. The crowd whispered and pointed. Some laughed. Others shook their heads at the foolishness of House Sora, sending this fragile creature to face a genetic weapon. Yuna sat in the House Sora viewing box, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, Lieutenant Jisoo, who had fought alongside Taiho on the Wrath flagship, watched with knowing eyes. "He's not afraid," Jisoo said quietly. "I know." "No, Commander." "Look at him! Really look!" Yuna looked. Taiho was standing relaxed, his breathing slow and even, his eyes fixed on the Gorath with calm focus. There was no tension in his shoulders, no nervous energy in his movements. He stood like a man waiting for a train, not like a man facing death. "He's done this before," Jisoo continued. "Maybe not exactly this, but something like it. He's faced enemies bigger than him, stronger than him, more dangerous than him, and he survived." "How do you know?" "Because I watched him on that ship. I saw what he became when there was no hope left." Jisoo's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't fight like someone trying to win. He fights like someone who's already accepted dying and decided to make it as expensive as possible. That's the most dangerous kind of enemy there is." The ceremonial horn sounded. The duel had begun. Volok charged immediately, crossing the arena with terrifying speed. His fist came down like a hammer, aimed at the spot where Taiho was standing. But Taiho wasn't there anymore. He moved in a blur, sliding sideways at the last possible moment, letting the Gorath's blow crater the sand where he had been. Before Volok could recover, Taiho was inside his guard, driving a precise strike into the nerve cluster at the base of the giant's spine. Volok roared in pain and swung wildly. Taiho ducked, rolled, and struck again, the back of the knee this time, a joint that even bone plating couldn't fully protect. The crowd gasped. The Gorath was staggering. But Volok was not finished. He caught Taiho with a backhand blow that sent the human flying across the arena. Taiho hit the sand hard, rolled, and came up spitting blood. "Good," he said, smiling through crimson teeth. "Now I know you can hit." He attacked again. The fight became a brutal dance. Volok had strength, reach, and durability. Taiho had speed, precision, and something the Gorath couldn't understand. He kept getting up. Every time Volok landed a blow, and he landed many, Taiho would fall, and then he would rise. Again and again, he rose. Bones cracked, wounds opened, blood painted the sand, and still the human kept fighting. In the viewing box, Yuna couldn't breathe. She watched Taiho take punishment that would have killed any Valorian and keep moving. She watched him strike weak points the Gorath didn't know he had, wearing down the giant one nerve at a time. 4 minutes into the fight, Volok was limping badly. His left arm hung useless at his side. Something in the shoulder had given way. His breathing was ragged, labored, confused. He had never faced anything like this. He had fought warriors who were skilled, warriors who were brave, warriors who were strong. He had never fought someone who simply refused to acknowledge defeat. "What are you?" Volok gasped, swinging wildly at an enemy who kept slipping away. Taiho dodged the blow and drove his elbow into the Gorath's throat. "I'm a Marine," he said, "and Marines don't surrender." The final sequence happened almost too fast to see. Taiho feinted left, drawing Volok's guard up, then dropped low and swept the giant's damaged leg out from under him. The Gorath crashed to the sand, and before he could rise, Taiho was on top of him. one hand pressing against the vulnerable spot where skull met spine. "Yield," Taiho said calmly, "or I push my fingers through your brainstem." Volok's eyes went wide. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. The accumulated damage to his nervous system had finally caught up with him. "You can't," he started. "I can, and I will." Taiho's voice was without emotion, without mercy. "But I'm giving you a choice. That's more than your master gave the assassins he sent to kill my commander." The arena was silent. Every delegate, every servant, every guard held their breath. Volok looked up at the viewing box where Doyen of House Kang sat frozen. Then he looked back at the human who had done the impossible. "I yield," he whispered. Taiho released him and stood. He was covered in blood, his own and the Garath's, and he could barely stay upright. But he stood anyway. He stood and looked up at the assembled nobility of 100 worlds. "Does anyone else," he asked quietly, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the arena, "want to test what humans are capable of?" No one answered. Yuna was in the arena before she realized she had moved. She crossed the sand at a run, her formal robes trailing behind her, and threw her arms around Taiho without caring who was watching. "You impossible, stubborn, ridiculous man," she whispered into his shoulder. "I promised," he replied, his arms wrapping around her despite the pain it must have caused. The political aftermath was immediate and dramatic. House Kang lost their voting rights for a century. Lord Doyun, humiliated beyond recovery, resigned his position and disappeared into obscurity. House Sora rose to become one of the most influential factions in the Empire, but the larger changes took more time. Word of the duel spread across the galaxy. Humans emerged from hiding on a dozen worlds, drawn by stories of the Marine who had reminded the universe what their species could do. They came to Taiho seeking guidance, training, purpose. He gave them all three. Within a year, the Human Legion was born, a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They served the Valorian Empire, but more importantly, they served each other. They were the ones sent when hope had died. They were the wall between the innocent and the darkness. And at their head stood Taiho, the unkillable, the god of war, the man who had risen from refugee to legend. But legends are still people. And people, even the strongest of them, need connection. One evening, a year after the conclave, Yuna found Taiho on the observation deck of their ship, a new ship, a flagship befitting her new rank of admiral. He was staring at the stars as he often did, his expression thoughtful. "You saved my house," she said, standing beside him. "My life, my crew. You owe me nothing now. The debt is more than repaid." "There was never a debt," Taiho said quietly. "There was only choice." "And what do you choose now?" He turned to face her, this alien woman who had accidentally awakened a god of war, who had given him purpose when he had none, who had believed in him when no one else would. "I choose you," he said, "not as a commander, not as a patron, as a partner, an equal." He took her hand, the same gesture she had made a year ago, offering to learn from him. "If you'll have me." Yuna felt tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I claimed you out of duty," she said. "I kept you out of obligation. I trained with you out of necessity." She raised her free hand to his face, touching the scars that marked his journey. But somewhere along the way, all of that became something else. "What?" "Love," she said. "Ridiculous, unexpected, impossible love." Taiho smiled, a real smile, warm and human, the kind he had almost forgotten how to make before she reminded him. "Humans have a saying," he told her. "When you find something worth dying for, you found something worth living for. And you found that?" He kissed her, gently, reverently, like a promise made sacred by survival. "I found you," he said. Everything else followed. Outside, stars burned in the infinite dark, cold and ancient and indifferent. Wars would come and go. Empires would rise and fall. The galaxy would keep turning, oblivious to the small lives struggling within it. But in that moment, on that ship, something warm and impossibly human had taken root. A love born from duty, a partnership forged in fire, a bond between two souls who had found each other against all odds. Taiho had been claimed as a possession. He had risen as a protector, He had ascended as a legend, and now at last he had become something more. Whole. The god of war had found his peace, and the galaxy would never be the same.